Taking a course is an experience. Being in the military is an experience. Being a housewife or a husband is an experience. But how you reflect on the broad nature of your experience and from that extract, like distillate, you extract the meaning of it so that you move from what I have done to what I have learned, how I have changed behaviorally, professionally, skill-wise, culturally, whatever it may be. And that process of learning how to pull the meaning out of your experience and understand it is where the power lies, where the personal connection is made, and why we now know that people who complete this process, and I'm sure it's true here and wherever the countries are that you practice, it is as true there as I know it to be from the research done in the U.S. That is in itself where we create a lifelong learner, someone who goes forward consciously and proactively, understanding increasingly how to extract meaning from experience in useful ways for them. And of course that mirrors, I don't know how many of you are aware of a great Canadian researcher who was at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education named Dr. Alan Tuff. If you don't know about the adult learning projects, you've got to get his stuff. I'll never forget, I was starting Community College of Vermont. I was 25 years old. I got this book. I don't know how I got it. And I got in my car. I called him up and I got in my car and I drove to Toronto and spent the day with him. Because he had literally created knowledge. What he had done was imagine a structure, a scaffolding, which is I will spend at least 15 hours trying to learn something, and it may be post-secondary, it may not be. He called it the Learning Project. And he then found that the average adult spends about, I'm going to say, 650 or 700 hours a year. Now, divide that by 52 if you want to get hours a week, that they're spent consciously trying to learn something. And there's, in fact, a cycle to it, which I called assess, plan, implement, and evaluate, just to get a righteous cycle. I mean, you can begin the journey, plan the journey, take the journey, arrive at your destination, and decide whether it was worth it to go. I mean, it doesn't matter what we call the steps. But then what we got to was the idea that if, we know a mountain stream, if you stop putting poop in it, will get clean. It will clean itself. And I began to think, well, if there's a natural cycle to the way individuals learn, and Tuff did his work on every continent and across multiple cultural and economic diversities, and it pans out wherever and whoever. So if there is a natural cycle of learning, wouldn't it be interesting to try to build an educational institution, process, practice around the natural cycle as opposed to pushing it aside and saying, no, now you come to the university, we're going to help you learn our way. And so that has been one of the driving forces of my professional life ever since, although it is only in the last 8 to 10 years has it become actually clear to me what this passion was that was driving me, and in fact to some of my friends making me potentially fairly boring from time to time, because I love to talk about it and write about it. Now, why I say all this is I want you to know a little bit about me as a person and as a professional, and so what some of my thinking is, and the last thing I'll talk about is what I call the table of opportunity. I believe, and if you listen to David this morning, we know that this is truer than it ever has been. It becomes more true every day. In fact, education is the key to opportunity, whether it's civic or social or economic or cultural. People who are more educated simply do better on almost every scale. We have people in the States who will say, well, I'm not sure that everybody needs an education, to which my reaction is, well, if you don't think living longer, voting more, participating in your community more, and making more money, if you choose to, if you don't think those are important outcomes, then you're probably right. Education just isn't very important. But if you happen to think, health, civic participation, being an empowered professional, make your own choices, you think those things are important, like the jury is not still out. the jury has come back in. Those are good things and good things to happen. So the promise of education moves us away from the hierarchies of the past. It says if you want a seat at the table of opportunity, as you understand it and describe it and define it, with an education, you don't have to stand in line. You don't have to wait for someone who's already at the table to die. You don't have to knock someone off their seat. That the commitment that education makes and enables for people who are lucky enough, hardworking enough to get it, to grab it, to make it work for them, the promise it makes to them is that they can draw up a chair at that table of opportunity as they wish to. And to me, that is the core value that we start with. And assessment of prior learning, my bias and belief, lies at the heart of that. Now, let me tell you how that relates to what we call the game breakers in the new ecology of learning. The book, if I were to have written it more flexibly, I could have taken the word America out. Sir John Daniels, who some of you may know, is now at the Commonwealth of Learning, reviewed the book for me, and he said in his comments, this book could be about anywhere in the country, in the world, or it could be about the world. I, having just come back from UNESCO, felt constrained to write about the United States because I know about the United States, and I had learned to have too much respect for other countries, other cultures, and other situations to think that a mere statistical analysis would necessarily be sufficiently thoughtful or sufficiently helpful. So I wrote it about the United States simply because I felt, and about adults, because those are two areas where I've spent a lot of time. And so I hope, to the extent you're interested in it, you find it useful beyond that unfortunate fourth word in the main title. But I'm going to focus today on a new ecology of learning, because what it has done, and the way we would say it in the States, is for you, for the people you work with, and for the issues you confront every single day, the game is coming to you. My experience has been historically that when we do these kinds of things, we operate at the margin of our institutions, we operate at the margin of our systems, and we are continually just having to justify what we're doing and why and how to people who are skeptical because they, as my dear departed father said, if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know. And so we are surrounded by these people. But what has happened is that the game has changed fundamentally. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. And I'd be happy to talk to you about it during the course of the afternoon, or I don't know if there's a reception tonight. I'm going to be here until early tomorrow morning. So I know I'll learn something as well. What has happened, and I'm going to talk about this in two or three different ways. I'm going to take my watch off because I usually get so wound up that I forget about the time, and I don't want anybody coming after me. Let's see what we got. That isn't going to work. Historically, the power to make change resides within the university, not out, and I'm using that in a formulaic way. You have to work through the deans or the equivalent and the governance structure. You can serve. When we started the Community College of Vermont, I spent all of my tactical time worrying about the traditional universities in Vermont because they could have put us out of business just like that. And so all of our tactics about how we came into the system and how we justified our existence and how we flat stayed out of their way. So, if you don't want a dog to bite you, the better thing would be not to kick the dog. So we tried not to kick the dog, but that was 40 years ago. They controlled it. We were absolutely clear about where we had to earn our chops and how to do it, and we did it. That is not the case today. The forces driving this new potential, this new ecology, lie outside the university, and they are evolving at a faster rate than any institution can keep up with in terms of cost recovery, investment, integration, embedding them. And I'm talking for the purposes of this understanding, and I expect there are numbers of people in the room that know more in specific than I do about these different technologies, but what I call Web 2.0 plus, social networking, all of the things that have essentially, and if there is, other than the reflection point, what I want to talk to you about a little bit is the impact of the end of scarcity. I don't know if you've seen the book, The Long Tail, but what the web has done is it has made information free to store, infinite in its storage life, and utterly ubiquitous. All information. I've had the pleasure of serving on the external advisory board for the MIT's Open Courseware Consortium. You may have heard about that project, which is now a global consortium, 280 institutions, 15,000 courses on the internet. Then you have iTunes University, and you have Moodle and Moodle Rooms. The entire MIT undergraduate curriculum is free on the internet if I can find somebody who's a subject matter expert and knows enough to supervise the independent study or the assessment of something somebody says they learned by watching the course. I mean, that is a game changer. And what is so interesting, and what I'd like you to think about with me, is that it enables unparalleled levels of personalization on the one hand, and it offers unparalleled combinations of learning that people can do. So when I talk about personalization, I'm not talking about 1,000 curricula for 1,000 people. That is not possible to sustain unless they're all designing their own, and I think in some cases that might be entirely plausible. But what I'm talking about is that in 1,000 cases, somebody understands powerfully the connection between who they are, their background, their history, their hopes, their aspirations, and what it is they're trying to learn. That's personalization. Here's what's in this for me. Here's why I want to do this. And understanding where you've come from in your life's journey in substance as well as emotionally and all the other areas is a critical component to basing the future on what you have experienced, and to have your experience respected. I think one of the reasons we lose people from schools, colleges, and I would say this across the board, is that we don't, in not respecting older students especially, their background, they in fact don't feel that personal connection. So that's, to me, what is now given to us. And when I say the game is coming to us and to you, I think what you do is at the heart of staging a great education for the adult of the future. The other thing, and this is far more problematic, is what does it mean that we have that scarcity has ended? And what I'm going to try to do is describe for you what I mean by that and just how powerful it is. The entire educational enterprise is organized around a concept of scarcity. There are not enough smart people to teach, so we're going to train up the faculty and collect them in a place, and then there aren't enough seats for everybody who might have the capacity to learn, so we're going to choose who comes to school and who doesn't. And it plays out, and in the U.S., it cascades down. So you have the elites, and then you have the community colleges and the institutes. And what we are doing is winnowing people out. That is the effect. I'm not saying that is the motivation of people in education. I'm saying that is the effect of the system, the way it is organized. And I have not seen any that wasn't organized that way. And if somebody knows of one, I'd love to see the example. So what happens is, and in fact, and you heard David on this morning, right up to and including the jobs or the areas of social responsibility, the whole theory was that, there aren't as many of them as there are people, so we're going to winnow those people out too. But now, of course, we have more jobs emerging around the world that are chasing an absent high-skilled workforce relative to India or Canada or US or any place else. And so, in fact, we have abundant opportunity now, not scarce opportunity. And we still have a system its definition is on deciding who will succeed and who will not. And from a moral as well as a professional and economic and personal perspective, we need to dedicate ourselves to the proposition, the learner-centered proposition that you folks already understand and are dedicated to, that in fact the learner comes first, that in fact we build off that person, and what we are trying to do through education is create merit, not winnow people out, but include people and actually foster. Because think of one of my sons is an emergency room doctor. Imagine an emergency room doctor. Of course, you have no health problems in Canada, I know. But imagine an emergency room doctor saying, "Come back when you're healthy." You know, this being sick is just, it's a pain. So come back when you're healthy, and then we'll deal with you. And that's a bit of an overstatement, but you get the point. What we are doing is saying, what we do is make choices with you and about you, not you come to us and by God, we're going to help you get where you want to go with substance and quality, and we're going to do that because it's good for you and it's good for the society and it's good for the world. And so that's the opportunity that has been opened up to us because of this still early stage, for me, largely imponderable technological revolution that literally makes learning any time, any place, any subject possible. I'll give you one example about that, and then I'll talk a little bit about scarcity and abundance. But that's the case I would make is that the end of scarcity and the beginning of abundance is the fundamental game changer that has happened, and that abundance is not controlled by the traditional power centers of higher education. That change is going to continue apace, and people are going to understand it and harness it in new organizations or old organizations or amended old organizations. They're going to do it regardless of what the people who run and are worried about traditional universities do or say. I mean, the cat is out of the bag, and there's no way that we're going to be able to put it back in. But I think so content and curriculum is just simply not scarce. I'm not saying that anyone would want to do this, but imagine Oxford. What is it in the ether about Oxford? Well, intellectually rich environment where you can go to 100 lectures a week. There's no limitation. You can do whatever you want. You have a Don. Maybe you have Donesses now too. I don't know. And you have guided study. So each Don may have 8 to 10 or 15 to 20 people. And so you are in this enriched place, atmosphere, and you write and you talk and you go to lectures and then you all rub up around each other, and then over time you produce things and they say good job and you go home. Oxford.edu. You could create an Oxford-level conversation between prepared and subject matter experts or wise men and women, a limited number of students, with the entire galaxy of the Internet organized for the purposes of the conversation at your resources, at your hand as learning resources. That could happen tomorrow. Like this simply, if somebody wanted to set up a college like that, they could do it tomorrow. So content and curriculum is no longer scarce. And teachers and experts, great teachers are still scarce. But people who are knowledgeable about subject matter, people who know a great deal, people who can help as a coach or a mentor or a guide, people who can look at something and say it's sufficiently qualitative to deserve validation with credit or whatever the point is. They are not scarce anymore, not scarce to the university setting. They are accessible to high numbers of people. Places to learn are not scarce because that table has been turned upside down. And so what you now have is people can learn any place, any time. I mean, you know the e-labs. You can now actually do physics, biology, all the difficult things in e-labs. It's astonishing to me since I never was good at any of those things. I haven't spent as much time thinking about them. And high-skilled jobs are not scarce. So what you have is simply this enormous amount, if you will, of plenty. So the new ecology of learning, what is to me fascinating about it, and in the book I do not, nor will I try to predict a model. I might, if I got really lucky, go off and create a model just to see if it would work or not. But I don't think there's going to be any one way to do this. I think there are going to be characteristics that are present in what I call the talent-friendly college of the 21st century. And so there are going to be characteristics, but how people actually organize themselves, what kind of economic models they use. I've sat at every side of the table possible in American higher education. I've worked for public nonprofits twice. I've worked for private nonprofit universities twice. Now I'm working for a proprietary institution precisely because I wanted to figure out what their potential was for fostering and embedding and persisting with change. And I have to say it is a higher potential, I think, than the traditional academic organizations because they are not distracted by important subjects like research and other things which are part of the university value. But that's when people say, I'm sending my son or daughter to X place, they aren't thinking about subsidizing the research that the senior faculty their children will never see are doing. So universities are complex and very important places. I'm just talking about teaching and learning. Okay? I try to keep it simple. And what I'm saying is that I just don't believe that the teaching and learning that is going to come in the 21st century will in fact be led by the universities in hand. Now, I've got to find my piece of paper. There it is. So what are the characteristics that I'm thinking about? One, I already told you one, the abundance of coursework, but the abundance of information. I mean, so you can use existing course structures, or you can go off and have guided independent study of all different shapes and sizes, no doubt about it. Then comes to what's near and dear to my heart and yours, among other things, and that is learning, what I call learning, recognition, and portability. You cannot have a highly mobile world, increasingly mobile world, with people learning, we now know, all over the place, you know, in businesses, in unions, in the military, experientially in their own lives, formally at colleges and universities, and have the need for people to be retooling themselves throughout their lives, and not see the process of recognizing and weighing and validating that learning as being the central academic diagnostic that has to happen, and it just happens to be hugely empowering and respectful and great pedagogy in addition to all those other more practical matters. So I don't see a university or a college of the 21st century that can't make responding to the learning that people have done throughout their lives, formal and informal, packaging it and understanding it with them as a centerpiece. I would say a third area is that the learning platform, and I'm going to use that term generically for those of you who know, which is most of you know more about technology than I do, but the learning platform is going to be the defining architecture of the college of the 21st century, not the campus. Now, I'm not saying there won't be campuses. What I'm saying is that even campuses that are trying to respond today and going forward are going to run all their business off a learning platform. And that, in fact, you can run this whole learning equation, teaching and learning equation, off a learning platform without a campus or in a blended or hybrid environment. We know that. So one of the things that is, I think, unnerving to people who live on campuses and work at campuses and for whom that pedagogy is the structure of their lives, it's very unnerving because they can feel this change happening. And to go with it, I would say that networking, will be the new defining process of higher education teaching and learning, not the faculty and governance. Now, I'm not saying there won't be faculty. What I'm saying is that the defining characteristic will be how people work with each other and how people look at the content that is useful to them, how they engage with that content. It is going to be far less hierarchical, and it is going to have much more learner input, and it is simply going to look very different. So there will be faculty, of course, and we need them, and we need the governance issues. I don't know what they are in other countries as well as they do in the United States. I think are going to have to be confronted at some point because they rob the system of such flexibility, and either we're going to say these folks are not going to be served, or we're going to find ways to serve them. So I think that will be more problematic. I think as we go forward, you'll see services that are an unbundling of services. I'll give you an example from the United States. Again, you may know of others in Canada or your country. But there is first of all, you have Open Courseware Global Consortium, 15,000 courses, no teaching, no counseling, no evaluation, right? But the content, that is part of the educational value proposition. Good content. It's hanging out there alone. And people are trying to, as with iTunes University and others, people are now trying to figure out what you do with it, other than just use it recreationally. So you have that. There's a group, and this was very telling for me, a group in America, it's a business called Straightline. And I read about this in the Chronicle of Higher Education. This guy went around and he surveyed the 20 most heavily subscribed lower division general education courses, accounting, composition, those in the United States. And he then went to a major publisher, I'm going to say it was McGraw-Hill, and he said, I want you to create curriculum with equal kind of quality and exit standards in these 20 areas. They did it. He then went to a national accrediting group and said, here are these 20 courses. If somebody came to your institutions, would you recommend that these courses be given transfer credit? And they said yes. He then went to the American Council on Education, which runs a national transfer center, and he said, will you have your faculty review these courses and see whether they're good for transfer? They came back and said, yes, they are. So then he went and put them up. They're self-paced, and he has tutoring and mentoring and advising. He's pricing them at $500 a course. And if you think you can do it faster than 10 weeks, he'll give you a week-by-week charge so you can actually get it for $350 if you think you can get done in 7 weeks. So he's changed all the pricing. Now, I want you to remember where that story started, because it started with the 20 most valuable courses the universities make the most money off of at the lower division when they park unsuspecting 18-year-olds in huge lecture halls. And this guy is now doing it for a fraction of the cost, and he's got 2 major groups. I read supporting him, and I read about it in the Chronicle, and I won't say what I said, but I said, holy cow. This is indeed a breakthrough, because for the first time you have a group that does not pretend to be or aspire to be a college or a university whose courses have been approved a priori and up front for people who want to take them. And if there was one of those in 2009, there's going to be 3 this year and 7 next year, and then all sorts of other things will start to happen as well. So I really see this unbundling of services, and as we go forward and we think about where are the employment agencies, I know where they might be in the U.S., that you can approach with your assessment program so you can get validation, not only academic validation, but if somebody is good enough at something, they can actually get certification in an industrial, at an industrial level. And I'll give you an example. I'm sure in Canada as well, probably a lot of places, you have something called a Cisco certificate. If you're in IT and you have a Cisco certificate, you are good to go. I mean, they'll hire you. So what we're working on is, well, if a Cisco certificate means I know and I'm able to do these things, why can't I create a curriculum so that if somebody with a Cisco certificate wants to come to our college, we'll give them advanced standing and other things, maybe more than just that, because they've already got it. But equally importantly, make an agreement with Cisco that if our students get to that level, they can come over and just immediately apply for a Cisco certificate. Why not? Do I really need an accreditor to tell me that's a good idea? Of course, my answer would always be yes. But the answer, in truth, is probably not. So I see all sorts of those kinds of things happening. And so part of this unbundling, another feature of it, is what I would call new alliances. The rate of change is such, and the economic condition is such, that any one institution being very good at multiple activities, I think is going to become increasingly rare. You just got to figure out if the heart of your enterprise is assessment, or it's teaching and learning, or it's whatever it is, then you're going to need partners to help you do lots of other things. And some of the examples, I know that American unions are making contracts with online learning providers because they have concluded that for their members that is a wonderful benefit, and it makes the union more attractive. And we know that in the American Association of Retired People, which regrettably I am a member of now, except I'm not retired, they are doing exactly the same thing with something called the Plus 50 program. So if you're over 50, they want to be able to broker educational services to their, oh, by the way, 50 million members. Now, why do they want to do that? It makes them more attractive as a membership organization. So you're going to see all these things that would have been unheard of 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, unimaginable, because you don't have the capacity, right? 30 years ago, they'd have to make a deal with every state and every state university and a community college within 50 miles of every place, and it would just be a mess. Today, it can happen differently. So, as we consider these, and those for me are the big game changers, and what they are potentials. I'm, as you will understand, not trying to direct the potential. I don't have that clear a looking glass into the future. I am very confident, however, my mother once said about me, occasionally wrong but never in doubt. I'm very confident about some of the things that will have to change for these things, and will change. Either they will be drivers of change or the results of change. Course level learning outcomes are going to become more and more important. It's the only place, if you've diversified all of the inputs, where I learn, how I learn, who I learn with, the assessment of the learning, the game is coming to you, remember that, the assessment of learning in humane and rigorous ways becomes the point of consistency. And I would argue that increasingly as we go forward, the definition of quality in this highly mobile, portable world is going to be learning that is assessed with validity, and I would say that will include third-party assessments in some auditing way, that it is reliable, in other words, done according to standards that are public and transparent, and because it is based in technology, it is consistent, so that we can create very rich, and I will say juicy learning environments where you can go and do almost anything, or you can be in a self-paced curriculum that's highly engineered, but you come back to the same learning outcomes. So you aren't compromising the right of people to create a learning environment that's best for them. What you are saying is, at the end of the day, to use a baseball metaphor, hopelessly, I know, American, you gotta come to home plate. And that's where educators will be waiting to help you understand what you've done. So I think there's going to be a new definition of quality around learning outcomes and around evidence, and it is going to the three legs to that stool are validity, reliability, and consistency. We're going to use much better diagnostics because the very universities that won't use them have done all the science. And so there's an enormous amount of diagnostic information from learning style, which is under some challenge, but I can't believe if we looked at 1,000 people who left school without getting a degree, we wouldn't find some variations in learning style from 1,000 people who finished school. I just think we'd find something there. But it was emotional. When I was at Princeton, I was counseled, believe it or not, counseled out of the diplomacy program. They said, Peter, you know, just might not be the right thing for you, because diplomats have to be patient and they have to be nice to people. So, you know, but the point of the matter is we're going to have to figure out, along with all of that, and I want you to understand that assessment of prior learning, what Kaplan is all about, is the #1 diagnostic. Because once I know, go back to Alan Tuff, once I know where I want to go, I will make it work for me if I've got a partner in crime who's going to help, who's going to be sensitive and respectful to me. So the absorptive nature, and I think of these learning portfolios, and there are lots of other ways to do it, and I don't mean to denigrate them, but the nature of having people learn how to reflect on what they've done and extract the meaning from their experience is highly absorptive. In other words, they then see themselves in the product. And it is the only diagnosis that matters, is the connection between the person and their future. All the other things can then be wrapped into it because you have a willing learner who is not going, why am I sitting here doing whatever you're sitting there doing? So they're going to be personalized learning plans, and by that I don't mean, as I said earlier, 1,000-degree programs for 1,000 students, but that every student has a learning plan that is personal to them. They understand it. It is reflective of them and their strengths. And that means there's going to be lifelong learning e-portfolios. And this is something I don't know who's going to decide finally if there is, like standard gauge railroad tracks. At some point, somebody's going to say, gee, we ought to, know it's OECD or somebody is going to say, you know, we really ought to say that a learning portfolio has the following characteristics, and we can update that as we go through time, because it's pretty much spaghetti right now. And there are some global groups working on it. But there's no doubt they're going to have something called a portfolio or called something else, and it's going to include work skills, personal learning, formal learning, the life story. Chapters in my life story as I mature as a worker and a member of society and a family member and a citizen. I think so there's no doubt in my mind about that. I think we're going to have to, I know this is true for the United States, I don't know, I believe it to be true, and I know the Bologna Agreement is working on this, but there has got to be a more externally driven approach to articulation and transfer amongst institutions. It's one thing if you're trained in creative writing and then you decide you want to be a nurse. Okay, composition isn't, you know, biology. But that's not, we don't have to be unreasonable about this. But the fact is, we dock students, every time they transfer in the United States, on average, they lose a term. And since we now have more than half of our students attending more than one college or university, that begins to look, and 35% attending more than two, it adds up. The latest assessment is $20 billion a year in redundant government and student funding at all levels. You know, $20 billion bucks, that's a pretty good chunk of change. You know, you could do some damage for $20 billion. So I think it's going to become politically unacceptable. My own personal bias is I don't think the government ought to get into that business, just because I don't think that they'll do it as well as a smart bunch of educators could do it. On the other hand, educators don't seem to be busy paying a lot of attention to the project because they're making plenty of money off it. So I don't quite know where that train wreck is going to occur, but it is, and again, you are in the middle of it because you're looking at the assessed learning and equivalent courses and how to mosh that all together in a productive way for the learners. So that's going to change. And inherent in all of this is increased choice and control for learners. That is not worrisome to people in our side of the house because we work with learners to assemble and assess their learning. So we understand them as responsible partners. And how many people really do want to go off and do something really stupid and badly so that they won't get a job? You know, it's interesting. Anyway, there will be much better, and I've sort of dealt with this in passing, more comprehensive learning recognition and assessment services in multimodal forms. And I think what I meant, you think of this whole horizon of learning from highly pre-engineered with cognitive adaptation to a very free-flow, self-independent study with guidance, or personal learning without guidance that you then bring in for assessment. There's this whole horizon. As long as it is undergirded by consistent learning outcomes, in fact, you have coherence, and you can then choose as a learner or as a provider of learning where you want to position yourself, one or multiple places on that horizon. So you've got all of these possibilities, and I think the thing that is of most interest to me and of greatest concern to me is where will the right to innovate come from? I think right now we're seeing great concern on the part of creditors, and precisely because of all the things I've been talking about, people who have been able to make sense out of their world as it relates to higher education are feeling the edges of that world begin to give way, and they're very nervous about it. So one of the things we have to do is continually generate good information, good metrics, good science about what we do and how we do it and what its economic and human and professional value is to the person and to the society. If we can and continue to try to promote in the regulatory and political spheres an engagement with innovation, an understanding that it's important to do, and that the potential we face in terms of human lives, in terms of societal success, in terms of competitiveness, if we have to get it right down to that level, each in different ways, but we all face those things. That being successful in those terms comes back to embracing these game changers, and at the heart of it, embracing what you magnificent people do every day, which is assessing experiential learning, prior learning, and helping people understand where they stand and therein where their dreams can take them. Thank you very much.